There are 6 crafting professions in World of Warcraft, and each profession has the ability to craft specific and unique mounts. Currently, there are 21 mounts which players can craft, and today we'll go over the profession mounts that are the most intensive to craft in terms of the work required, the gold cost for all the materials, and the time it takes to actually craft and farm the parts for the mount itself. Although the gold cost fluctuates often, so take them more as guidelines. And at number 10, we have the turbocharged flying machine. This engineer crafted mount was added to the Burning Crusade, specifically patch 2.3, and it is currently going for about 43,000 gold on average on the auction house as of writing this video. The schematic for this mount can be learned by any engineering trader in the Burning Crusade. Since the required ingredients for crafting this mount were changed at the beginning of Wrath, we'll first be looking at how the mount was crafted in the Burning Crusade. In TBC, the turbocharged flying machine was actually an epic mount, and you have to craft the flying machine control, which is the basic flying version, to be used in the recipe to craft the epic mount. Meaning you'd usually end up crafting this mount twice, once to use yourself, and then a second time to use in the crafting the epic variant. Without going into all the lengthy details, a player would need 100 fel iron ore, 85 motes of fire, 10 motes of earth, 16 corium ore, 4 eternium ore, 8 starwood, and 1 hula girl doll. All of the materials can be obtained from mining except the hula girl doll, which is sold by Griftath, and costs between 80 to 100 gold depending on reputation with a lower city. At the beginning of Wrath, the flying machine control was replaced by 4 adamantite frames, which cost in total 16 adamantite ore and 40 motes of earth. And while the adamantite frames could be instead purchased from some vendors, they still cost a pretty penny, and also were limited and heavily sought after, meaning you usually just crafted/bought the items from another player. Some of these ingredients can be bought from various vendors, but they're usually limited in quantity or on random spawn timers. Overall, there are only 2 professions which are required to make the turbocharged flying machine: engineering and mining. The only actual required gold cost for this mount is having to buy the starwood and the hula girl doll, but that in total only usually costs around 100 gold or so. And this video was brought to you by Skillshare, an online learning platform which is full of tutorials on anything you might want to become an expert in. Have you been feeling bored lately and have always wanted to start a YouTube channel, but you don't know where to get started? Well, there's this really great class that I always recommend to people about how to get started called Edit Videos with Free Open Source Software by Robert Reed, some of which I even use myself. And thanks to Skillshare, the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can learn everything you need to know about maybe making your own YouTube channel. Personally, I'm always looking up things as in the YouTube scene. If you're not constantly trying to improve, then you get left behind. And I rely on Skillshare's videos rather than looking up random YouTube tutorial videos online, so I'm more than happy to recommend them myself. So, if you need to learn some new skills, maybe try joining. First 1,000 people who sign up using my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. And now, let's continue on with our next spot on this list. And at number 9, we have the Steelbound Devourer. This is a mount that can only be made by Blacksmith and was added in Legion. The recipe for this foul green doggy has a 2% drop rate from Tichondrius and the Nighthold in any difficulty except LFR. As of the making of this video, it's running around 45,000 gold at the auction house. The recipe for this mount isn't too bad to make. The main obstacle of crafting the Steelbound Devourer, after obtaining the recipe, is that it just takes some time and traveling around the Broken Isles. First, the player needs 100 Demon Steel bars, so they must go to the Firmament Stone and High Mountain in the Ironhorn Enclave and make 100 Demon Steel bars there. 1 Demon Steel bar is 2 Felslate ore and 1 Laystone ore, so the player will need 200 Felslate ore and then 100 Laystone ore in total. The Firmament Stone is the only place that players can make the Demon Steel bars, which means it is required to go there to craft them. Next, the player must acquire 50 Blood of Sargeras, which can be obtained by doing a wide variety of activities across all Legion content. After that, the player must do the Blacksmith-only Infernal Brimstone world quest multiple times to obtain 10 Infernal Brimstone from the big demon boy that spawns when the world quest is active. Finally, the player must either have the skinny profession or buy 10 Felhide from the auction house. This means if you want to gather all the materials and make this mount all by yourself, you would need mining, blacksmithing, and skinning. Additionally, the quest chain to unlock making Demon Steel bars is kind of long, annoying, and boring on its own, leading to a rather tiresome mount to get. And at number 8, we have the Sky Golem from Mist of Pandaria. This engineering crafted mount is very sought after for its ability to pick herbs while being mounted. The journal for this mount drops for most mobs in the Veil of Eternal Blossoms in Siege of Orgrimmar, but it has a very low drop rate, usually less than 0.5% for most mobs. The schematic also teaches the player how to craft the pet Pierre, which is a little robot butler, a Rascalbot, a little red robot companion, and an advanced refrigeration unit, a 36-slot cooking bag. All of them using another item the recipe teaches you how to craft, the Jard's Peculiar Energy Source, and 30 of these are needed to craft the mount. The mount was added in 5.4, the titular Siege of Orgrimmar. The mount takes at least 30 days to craft because 2 of the main ingredients can only be made once per day, and there are 30 needed of each of them. The first of these 2 ingredients is the previously mentioned Jard's Peculiar Energy Source, which is from the engineering profession and has a 1-day cooldown. And to make matters worse, Jard's Peculiar Energy Source is bind on pickup, so it cannot be traded or sold to other players. Since one is made from 10 ghost iron bars, and one ghost iron bar requires 2 ghost iron ore, the player will need a minimum of 600 ghost iron ore to craft the components themselves. The second ingredient is 30 living steel, which is made from the alchemy profession using 6 trillion bars and can be made in 2 different ways. One of which requires 30 days because of the daily cooldown, while the other way removes the daily cooldown using Spirits of Harmony. 3 Spirits of Harmony and 3 trillion bars per living steel allows you to technically do it in one day. However, having to wait 30 days for the jards means you might as well wait. And of course, living steel is not bind on pickup, so for engineering players, you do not need to worry about picking up alchemy and can instead buy these from the auction house. Overall, crafting this mount requires the engineering, mining, and alchemy professions. The 1-day cooldowns and crafting mats ensures the Sky Golem can never be made too fast, so there's always a constant demand for the mount, since they can't be made fast enough to meet supply. As of writing this video, the Sky Golem mount was going for an average of roughly 47,500 gold on the auction house. And at number 7, we have Xiwyllag ATV. This is a mount that was added in Battle for Azeroth and requires both the engineering and blacksmithing professions to craft. If you want to make this mount, you'll need to find your way to Mechagon, specifically the second half. The mount crafting recipe calls for 2 main parts: the supercharged engine, which can only be crafted from engineering, and the monolite reinforced chassis, which can only be crafted from blacksmithing. These 2 parts each have a different recipe, and since their drop rates are both rather low from the boss Cujo in the Operation Mechagon, you'll probably be farming for quite a while just to get both recipes to drop. To make matters worse, the recipes are bind and pickup, so that you can't give them to other players. Luckily, this is the hardest part of making this mount, since most of the mats needed to craft the Xiwyllag ATV are obtained by simply mining ores. The player will need 175 monolite ore and 115 storm silver ore. In addition to all the mining ores needed, there are several blacksmithing and engineering mats that are required. Luckily, these are sold by vendors and they're relatively cheap and end up costing less than 20 gold overall. Finally, the player will need to scrap several items in order to get 8 Explosum from the Scrap-O-Matic 1000 or the Shredmaster Mk2 located in Borealis and Tazal Lord respectively. Overall, this mount isn't too bad to make, but since it has such a long and tedious grind just to get the 2 recipe parts, that it can certainly become quite the headache to craft. As such, its rarity makes it sell for much more in the auction house than many would expect, since its demand far outweighs its current supply. If a player wanted to make this mount all by themselves and farm their own mats, they would need engineering, blacksmithing, and mining. However, for people who don't have unlimited amounts of time and alts, they can simply craft one part, then buy the other part off the auction house with the other profession, and sell their own parts to make some money back from people of the opposite profession doing the same. This mount also has 3 color variations which can be spray painted on by talking to the Goblin Cram Kaleido on Mechagon Isle. These paint colors must be obtained throughout Mechagon, however. The red paint bottle is obtained from the Iron Tide lockboxes in the Western Spray, with 3 different types of lockboxes, only able to obtain 1 key per day. Meaning, if you wish to farm this paint color, it's best you hold on to it and not use the other 2, as this will guarantee the only one you can get being the Iron Tide. The green paint bottle is from random chests in the alternate future, and the blue paint bottle is found in small metal boxes, obtained during the Quest 1 Gnome's Trash. These 3 colors are picked at the painting station, even with their own little painting cinematic. Xiwyllag is Gallywick spelled backwards, in case you didn't notice. According to Wowhead's aggregate data, each part of this mount goes for roughly 25,000 gold, totaling to 50k on the auction house as of making this video. And at number 6, we have a tie between 2 engineering mounts from Wrath of the Lich King. These 2 mounts, the Mechano-Hog and the Mekgineer's Chopper, were both selling for around 50,000 gold when this video was being made. The reason these 2 mounts can be tied is because they require the exact same materials to craft. It's just that the Mechano-Hog is Horde exclusive, and the Mekgineer's Chopper is Alliance exclusive. The schematic for the Mechano-Hog can be bought when the player is exalted with the Horde Expedition from the 2 Quartermasters in the Boran Tundra and the Howling Fjord, named Gara Skullcrusher and Sebastian Crane, respectively. The Mekgineer's Chopper schematic can be bought from the Alliance Vanguard Quartermaster when the Alliance player sits exalted with that faction. The 2 Quartermasters for this faction are also in the same 2 zones previously mentioned, and they are named the Logistics Officer Silverstone in the Boran Tundra and the Logistics Officer Brighton in the Howling Fjord. Both schematics cost 400 gold. The first ingredient to make these mounts is 12 Titan Steel bars, which themselves can be quite a pain to make. 3 titanium bars are required to make 1 Titan Steel bar, and 2 titanium ore make 1 titanium bar, meaning the player needs 72 titanium ore entirely. In addition to the titanium bars, 1 Titan Steel bar also requires 1 Eternal Fire, 1 Eternal Earth, and 1 Eternal Shadow. 10 crystallized elements makes 1 eternal element, which means the player ultimately needs 120 crystallized fire, 120 crystallized earth, and 120 crystallized shadow. And until the end of Wrath of the Lich King, crafting a Titan Steel bar had a 22-hour cooldown, heavily limiting how often these could be crafted. Next, 40 cobalt ore makes 40 cobalt bars, which in turn makes 40 handful of cobalt bolts via engineering. The next ingredient that is needed is simply 2 Arctic furs, but to obtain them, the player requires a skinning profession, or will have to buy them from another player. The final ingredients are all fairly expensive items that must be bought from a goblin named Roxy Ramrocket in the Storm Peaks. These ingredients are 1 salvaged iron golem parts at 3,000 gold for just 1, 8 goblin machine pistons which are 1,000 gold each, and 1 elementium plated exhaust pipe which costs 1,500 gold. In all, the total minimum gold requirement to build the mount, including the schematic itself, comes out to just under 13,000 gold. Overall, these two mounts require the engineering, mining, blacksmithing, and the skinning professions to complete in their entirety, with the alchemy profession being optional and supplementary. There are a few more notes, however, before we move on to the number 5 spot. The Mechano-Hog and Mekgineer's chopper mounts have been extremely rare chance drops in the Blingatron 4000 gift package, as well as the Blingatron 5000, 6000, and 7000 gift packages, and assumingly all future gift packages too. Upon close inspection, one can see the license plate on both vehicles says PNW. And with another fun fact that from patch 3.0 to 3.1, these mounts were not actually mounts, but vehicles. Meaning they had an animation to mount/dismount from them, they could not swim, and you actually did not take fall damage on them originally. Finally, obtaining this mount awards the achievement Get to the Choppa, which must be said in an Arnold Schwarzenegger accent at any time you recite it. And at number 5, we have Vial of the Sands from Cataclysm. This is the only alchemy mount in the game and allows the user to transform into a sandstone drake. While in this form, another player can ride on the dragon's back. Currently, the Vial of the Sands is going for just over 72,000 gold on the auction house. This mount is rare and expensive in 3 ways. First, the recipe is extremely hard to obtain. Secondly, some of the ingredients that are required must be bought from vendors and they cost a heavy amount of gold themselves. Finally, there are an enormous amount of mats to farm to actually make the Vial of the Sands. To obtain the recipe, the player must have learned the secondary profession archaeology skill and be excavating a Tol'vir dig site, which can only be found in Old Doom. To make matters worse, all the Kalimdor shares a handful of random archaeology dig sites, meaning that a player will have to do other dig sites all over the continent in hope of completing one and having a new Tol'vir dig site spawn in Old Doom. Additionally, the recipe has a very low drop chance of only 2% to drop from one specific artifact, which is the Canopic Jar. The Canopic Jar itself requires 45 Tol'vir artifact fragments to create. All of this means the grind for the recipe itself is a lot of work, since it's locked behind 3 layers of RNG. The first layer being the Tol'vir dig sites being up at all in Old Doom, the second being you get the Canopic Jar, and the third being the drop rate of the recipe when you open the Canopic Jar. The recipe for the Vial of Sands calls for 2 expensive ingredients. The first required ingredient is 1 Pyrium laced crystalline vial, which costs 5,000 gold and can only be bought from Yasmin, who was the innkeeper of the Oasis of Virsar. The second ingredient is called Sands of Time, which is also sold by Yasmin. 1 Sands of Time costs 3,000 gold, and the recipe calls for 8 of them. In total, that means crafting this mount will set you back at least 29,000 gold for the crafting materials. The remaining ingredients are 12 true gold, 8 flasks of the winds, 8 flasks of titanic strength, and 8 deepstone oil. The deepstone oil is by far the easiest to come across since all it requires is the fishing skill and collecting 8 albino cavefish by fishing at Deep Hole. 1 albino cavefish gives 1 deepstone oil, and the recipe only needs 8. True gold can only be created through alchemy, and to make 1 true gold requires 3 Pyrium bars, 10 volatile fire, 10 volatile air, and 10 volatile water. All of these materials can be acquired by mining, and in the same cases, by looting mobs and bosses. Since the recipe for the mount calls for 12 true gold, that's 36 pyrite ore to make 36 Pyrium bars, and 120 of each type for the 3 aforementioned volatile elements. To make matters even worse, in Cataclysm, the ability to transmute true gold had a 1-day cooldown, so you can only make 1 true gold a day. Lastly, there are 16 flasks in total needed as the last ingredients. In total, the collective ingredients for all the flasks are 128 volatile life, 128 whiptail, 64 Ajar's veils, 64 cinder blooms, and 16 crystal vials. All the materials for the flask can be obtained from gathering herbs with the exception of the crystal vial, which is just sold by alchemist vendors at a small cost. In terms of the total number of materials required, that's a little over 800 individual items needed to make the Vial of the Sands. Also, this mount technically requires 5 different professions to obtain all of its ingredients: alchemy, archaeology, fishing, herbalism, and mining. Upon finally learning the mount, you will receive an achievement which is unsurprisingly called Vial of Sands. And at number 4, we have the Geosynchronous World Spinner, which is a gnome-themed engineering mount only available to Alliance players that was added in Mist of Pandaria. As of writing this video, the mount was going for roughly 112,000 gold on the auction house. This mount can be learned from any Mist of Pandaria engineering trainer. The first ingredient in the recipe for the Geosynchronous World Spinner calls for 12 living steel, which can only be made via alchemy. First, as with all alchemy transmutations, don't forget to have the Philosopher's Stone equipped. Transmute living steel turns 6 trillion bars into 1 living steel, but this has a cooldown of 1 day and produces only 1 living steel at a time. Luckily, there is another way to create a living steel with alchemy, which is named the Riddle of Steel. Like we mentioned earlier in this video, this method only requires 3 trillion bars, but it comes at the cost of also needing 3 Spirits of Harmony. In addition to the trillion bars needed to make the 12 living steel, the player needs another 12 trillion bars for the recipe itself. A trillion bar can be made in one of 2 ways. The first way is through alchemy. This requires the player to transmute 10 ghost iron ore into 1 trillium bar. The second way to make a trillium bar is through mining. To make a trillium bar this way, the player needs to smelt 2 black trillium ore and 2 white trillium ore to make 1 trillium bar. The next ingredient on this list for the mount is 12 Spirits of Harmony, which as mentioned earlier can be a pain to farm since they cannot be bought outside of the possible obscene prices on the auction house and must be looted from mobs or quests across Pandaria. The second to last ingredient is an engineered ingredient. The recipe calls for 20 ghost iron bolts, which are made from ghost iron bars. 2 ghost iron ore are required to make 1 ghost iron bar, and 3 ghost iron bars are required to make 1 ghost iron bolt. Thus, to make all of the ghost iron bolts needed for the mount, you need a total of 120 ghost iron ore. The final ingredient is the most expensive one, and they cannot be gathered. Orbs of Mystery are required to finish the mount. 1 Orb of Mystery costs 20,000 gold, and they are only sold by 1 vendor NPC. This vendor's name is Big Keech, and he can be found in the Golden Pagoda in the Veil of Eternal Blossoms. If spending 20,000 gold on 1 ingredient doesn't sound too bad to you, get ready to triple that price because the recipe calls for 3 Orbs of Mystery. That means the player has to drop 60,000 gold just to get the right amount for this 1 ingredient for the mount. In grand total, that means the player has to get 720 to 840 ghost iron ore, 12 to 48 spirits of harmony, and or 168 white trillium ore and 168 black trillium ore, depending on how much they choose to craft with those materials. And of course, there's the 60,000 gold cost for the 3 Orbs of Mystery, as well as the 30 days for the cooldown if the player decides to save their spirits of harmony and use the Riddle of Steel. Overall, the mount requires 3 professions to craft: engineering, mining, and alchemy. Finally, if you want to avoid all that work and not buy it from the auction house, this mount also has an extremely rare chance to drop from the Blingatron's package as well. And at number 3, we have the Depleted-Kypairum Rocket. This engineering crafted mount was added in Mist of Pandaria and currently is selling for 113,000 gold in the auction house as of the time of writing this video. This is a goblin-themed mount and is the horde counterpart to the Alliance's previously mentioned Geosynchronous World Spinner. This mount can also be learned from any Mist of Pandaria engineering trainer. The ingredients are pretty much the same as the Geosynchronous World Spinner, and there's no need to list them out again. The only 2 exceptions are that this mount requires 12 high explosive gunpowder, which is an engineered ingredient that can be made with 12 ghost iron orb, and that this goblin rocket needs 200 Kypurite to be constructed. Kypurite is another ore that can be mined, but usually only on the western side of the continent of Pandaria. As with the Geosynchronous World Spinner, the mount technically requires the 3 professions of engineering, mining, and alchemy to obtain all the materials to craft it. The Depleted-Kypairum Rocket can also drop from certain Blingatron packages as well. This mount is listed at number 3 instead of being tied at number 4 with the Geosynchronous World Spinner for 2 reasons. First, farming the 200 Kypurite adds a fair bit of work and time to harvesting all these ores. Secondly, the rocket sells for slightly higher in the auction house, and the auction house is usually a good way to measure player sentiment, especially since the appearance of the gyro spinner looks like that of the giant nose rocket, while the Kypairum rocket itself looks like nothing but a giant explosive warhead. And at number 2, we have yet another engineering crafted mount, this time from Battle for Azeroth, and it's called the Mecha-Mogul Mk2. This mount is a goblin version of the Mimiron's head, which has a chance to drop from Yogg-Saron and Ulduar with no keepers up. As of writing this video, the Mecha-Mogul Mk2 was going for around 123,000 gold. The main reason this mount is so high up on this list is because many of the materials needed to craft this mount are rare drops, and to build it, the player needs several of each of these drops. First off, the schematic for the mount only has a 1% chance to drop from Mogul Razdunk in the Mythic and Mythic Plus version of Motherlode. 3 of the required materials are relatively easy to acquire. 50 platinum ore and 100 storm silver ore can be gathered from mining nodes, and obtaining 20 explosive from scrapping items isn't too bad either. The final ingredients are much harder to get and will require some serious farming. However, each of these ingredients have a higher chance to drop the higher Battle for Azeroth engineering is, usually obtained not only by maxing out your skill, but also through the use of the engineering goggles, increasing your engineering with Azerite levels. The mount schematic calls for 20 Azerite Forge Protection platings. These items are obtained rather commonly from salvaging the mechs within the Motherlode dungeon. The best bet is to salvage the coin-operated Crowd Pummeler, which is the first boss in the Motherlode, since it has a 25% chance to give the 1 Azerite Forge Protection plating. Don't forget that players need 20 of these items to craft the mount, so that's a lot of salvaging to do. Although this is the most common of the crafting materials to get, it will be the one you end up with lots of extra by the end. The next ingredient required is 20 blast-fired electric servo motors. These items act just like the Azerite Forge Protection plating, although at a much lower drop rate, them too being salvaged from mechs. Next is the Crush Resistance Stabilizer. It is obtained similarly to the 2 aforementioned ingredients and has a drop rate that is lower than the Azerite Forge Protection plating, but not as low as the blast-fired electric servo motors. However, all 3 of these items can drop in the dungeon's final boss on every kill, even in normal mode, leading to potential strategies like rushing through the entire dungeon to get to the end, clear aggro one way or another, even if a soulstone is needed, Then solo the final boss to get a fair few of each crafting material, especially since the higher engineering, with the use of maxed out engineering skills, goggles, and the potion will bring it up soon, allowing for this to be one of the best ways to farm the items without friends helping you. Although with the levels we've gained since, it has become far easier to solo the dungeon. The penultimate ingredient is one barely stable azurite reactor. This can be bought from the Hobart grapple hammer in the Motherlode instance for 30,000 gold. The final ingredient is the Mecha-Mogul Mk2 remote activation device, which drops from Mogul Razdunk. Players need to drink the Azurite Inspire Engineering Elixir to gain a buff which allows them to be able to loot this item. Unfortunately, it only has a 33 chance to drop from the Venture Code Mastermind mobs. However, the buff from this elixir also allows the player a higher chance to salvage the salvaged items, including best of all, the blast-fired electric servo motors from the mechanical mobs of the instance. The plating drops around 175 engineering, the stabilizer at around 200, and the servo motors at 225. Players must also have their Heart of Azeroth equipped to loot this item, as a necklace is what's increasing the power of your goggles in order to give you the engineering required to loot the items. Overall, this mount only requires the engineering and mining professions to obtain. The reason it's at number 2 on this list is because it required a lot of farming in the same dungeon, in addition to spending 30,000 gold for the barely stable Azurite reactor. So, if you want to farm this mount to sell or keep, make sure you bring your goggles, max out your engineering, get at least Azurite level 41, and some spare time to kill and salvage a ton of mechs and goblins. And finally, at number 1, we have the Jeweled Onyx Panther from Mist of Pandaria. This mount is quite the doozy to cast. It's currently selling on average for roughly 124,000 gold on the auction house, and there's a good reason why. To craft this mount, a player must first craft 4 other mounts that are then used in this recipe to make the Jeweled Onyx Panther. These 4 mounts are all expensive on their own, and also mean you will need to end up crafting 2 sets of these mounts yourself if you want all 5. These 4 mounts are the Sunstone Panther, the Jade Panther, the Ruby Panther, and the Sapphire Panther. The recipes for all these mounts can be bought from San Redscale, who's located in the Arboretum in the Jade Forest and serves as the quartermaster for the Order of the Cloud Serpent. Each mount recipe costs 200 gold, so in total the player has to give 1,000 gold to get all 5 recipes. The Jade and Sunstone Panther designs can be learned at Honored, the Ruby and Sapphire Panther designs at Revered, and the Jeweled Onyx Panther design at Exalted with the Order of the Cloud Serpent. 3 of the 4 ingredients needed for each of the 4 initial Panthers are the same, which is both a curse and a blessing. In total, the player will need 4 Orbs of Mystery, 16 Living Steel, and 8 Serpent's Eyes. The final 4th ingredient is different based on which Panther mount you're making. 2 of these ingredients, the Orb of Mystery and Living Steel, were discussed earlier in this video. Suffice to say, the player will have to spend 80,000 gold from a vendor to get all 4 Orbs of Mystery. Living Steel can be made via alchemy, and only 1 can be made each day since it's a 1-day cooldown. The player can get around this by using another recipe, but making 1 Living Steel this way requires a costly 3 Spirits of Harmony. To make 1 Serpent's Eye, the player must combine 10 Sparkling Shards. Sparkling Shards can be obtained when a player prospects any ore from Pandaria. Since 8 Serpent's Eyes are needed in total, this means 80 Sparkling Shards are needed. For the Sunstone Panther, the unique ingredient is 20 Sun's Radiances. And while Sun's Radiance and its other gems can be found rarely in prospecting, they can also be made through transmuting. 1 Sun's Radiance is made by transmuting 1 Sunstone, which comes from prospecting ores in Pandaria, and 1 Golden Lotus, which is a rare herb in Pandaria. The other 3 initial Panther mounts follow the same recipe with different ingredients. The Jade Panther requires 20 Wild Jade. 1 Wild Jade consists of 1 Alexandrite, which is another prospecting item, and 1 Golden Lotus. The Red Panther requires 20 Primordial Rubies, which are made from Pandaren Garnets and Golden Lotuses. Finally, the Sapphire Panther needs 20 River's Hearts, which consist of 20 Lapis Lazulis and another 20 Golden Lotus. After you have crafted all 4 of these mounts, you can finally combine them to make the Jeweled Onyx Panther. Remember to not use any of the component mounts, because if you accidentally click on it and you don't already know the mount will be taught to you and consume it on use. Overall, this mount requires the alchemy, herbalism, jewel crafting, and mining professions. This mount takes a lot of time and effort to grind out all the materials needed to make it. All told, this mount and all of its base required materials can easily be over 1,000 individual items in number, making it number 1 on this list. Even after all of that, remember this process does not grant you any of the 4 mounts you craft in the process of making the Jeweled Onyx Panther. If you want to craft all 5 Panther mounts, you'll need 160,000 gold for the orbs, 16 Serpent's Eye gems, 32 Living Steel, which is 192 trillion bars and 32 days worth of alchemy transmutes, if you do it without using Spirits of Harmony or blacksmithing, and 40 each of the Primordial Rubies, Sun Radiances, River Hearts, and Wild Jades, which itself means at the very least mining 800 ores. And for one fun fact, at least at the time of making this video, the Onyx Panther selling at 124,000 gold is actually cheaper than buying all 4 component mounts separate, each selling at 31 to 32k total, or 126,000 gold. 2,000 more gold than the Onyx Panther. So, what mounts did we miss? It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that most of these mounts on this list are engineering mounts, as engineering has always kind of been the mount/utility profession. We know there's only a handful of crafty mounts we did not list to choose from, but Blizzard might change that soon, especially with the profession revamp coming in Dragonflight. While some of these spots were hard to quantify, we wanted to only include mounts that were able to be traded with other players so we can gauge auction house prices. This list also didn't count all the time and gold needed to get reputations up before the player can actually buy some of these mount recipes. Finally, some of the various mod materials can be bought with Spirits of Harmony, and the Goblin Racial Best Deals Anywhere used to reduce the price of all the items as if they were exalted, even those that were not part of a faction. However, this has since been changed to only affect those who were part of factions, meaning no more much cheaper profession mounts. Alright, and that's it for the video. If you have any ideas for future videos similar to this one, please let us know down in the comments below.